Hello and welcome to Amnesty International and Fight for the Future's 8th Salon on the implications of Web3 technologies for human rights and activism. I'm Leah Holland, Campaigns and Communications Director with Fight for the Future. I use they or she pronouns and I'm based in Portland, Oregon. Today's subject is open source software and the right to code. As the US recently made the unprecedented move of sanctioning code itself, 21 autonomous wallet addresses on the Ethereum blockchain, we are taking on important questions around the implications of sanctioning or otherwise restricting software code and open source projects. The code in question, which was posted by anonymizing service Tornado Cash, was designed to allow anyone to make their crypto transactions private, since many ledgers, like those of Ethereum and Bitcoin, are public. But because North Korean hackers use this privacy-preserving tool, the US chose to sanction the code itself, leading to open source contributors being suspended from GitHub, multiple lawsuits, and a chilling effect on the open source community. Projects both within and without the crypto community are questioning whether the US government might come for them if their privacy-preserving tools are used by bad actors they don't intend them for. Actions like these can shape the future of the internet, what tools are built and invested in, and whether or not they promote human rights like privacy. And with that, I'll hand the screen off to Michael Kleinman, Director of the Silicon Valley Initiative at Amnesty International.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining, and a tremendous thanks to our panelists today. As Leah mentioned, my name is Michael Kleinman, and as Leah said, I lead Amnesty's work here in Silicon Valley, focusing on the human rights implications of technology, for better and for worse. I am beyond thrilled to introduce our amazing panelists today. Today, we will hear from 3 speakers: Savannah Lee from the Mysterium Network, Benedict Lau from Starling Labs, and Alahdiin, who works at Mobilecoin, which is a privacy-preserving protocol integrated with Signal Messenger. Each panelist will speak for a few minutes, and then we'll have an extended Q&A. As Leah said, please feel free to put any chats and please feel free to put any questions in the chat, and always please assume good intentions. And with that, Savannah, after you.
Thanks for the introduction, Michael, and also for having me here. It's a privilege to participate and learn from each other. And obviously these sanctions and the arrest of Alex Percev have been pretty shocking, especially for those of us building in the Web3 space, where I do feel there's a lot of tunnel vision, and naturally everyone's trying to figure out scalability and adoption. And I'm guessing a lot of us haven't taken the time to really deeply consider all of the implications of what we're building. How our technologies can have unintended consequences, how governments and regulators perceive or understand the benefits of Web3 tech and crypto tech. And I guess how we can work together to minimize any potential harms to the communities that we're building for. And that includes helping to identify and prevent bad actors from influencing the development of the space. So some backstory, the project I worked with is Mysterium Network. We're a peer-to-peer VPN, which is a virtual private network. We're open source and permissionless, so that means anyone around the world can use our tools or run a node. They can help power the VPN network itself. And because we're open source, you can fork the code and use the protocol however you see fit. So for anyone unfamiliar with a VPN, in a very simple way to explain it, it's a tool that can help keep your internet activity private by creating an encrypted tunnel. It helps anonymize you by changing your IP address. And because you change your IP address, it can help you bypass censorship or geo-blocks because you spoof the website or app into thinking you're in a different location to your own. So Mysterium has decentralized the traditional VPN model. Instead of connecting to servers managed by a business where they can theoretically, let's say, store logs of your browsing activity, and in some countries or cases can be forced to hand over that information to governments. In the case of a peer-to-peer VPN, you instead connect to others in the network. So anyone who wants to share their IP address with you. So we call these devices in the network nodes. And these nodes can receive cryptocurrency directly from users as a form of payment. So anyone can download the software, turn their device into a node, and it has somewhat similar architecture, I'd say, to Tor, for anyone familiar with that. And we find that this direct peer-to-peer VPN anonymity and access is much harder to track and block, since it's residential IP addresses, which appear as legitimate users. So our purpose is to enable internet freedom, provide a way to bypass unethical censorship anonymously or pseudo-anonymously, on the state or government level. So we're seeing things like this in Iran right now. We see in countries like Ethiopia and Sudan during their elections have state censorship, and also China and Russia with built-in censorship and surveillance at the ISP level. And we hope that by providing this anonymous internet access, we can help enable other freedoms, freedom of speech, freedom of expression, information of the press, and also freedom to publish code, since GitHub is blocked in certain countries. So I guess in the context of this conversation, sanctioning Tornado Cash and the arrest of an open source developer has a direct effect on every privacy tool and project, which I'm sure we'll get into. Yeah, I'm looking forward to discussing some of the ways we can work together to influence lawmakers to develop positive policies that really promote the benefits of this technology for everyone. Thanks.
Savannah, thank you so much. And for anyone who's trying to join the chat is now enabled for all participants and attendees. And with that, I will turn it over to Benedict.
All right, am I allowed to show slides? How's that? Do you all see this?
Perfect, thank you.
Great. So today I want to talk about both my work at Starling and also some of the open source projects I've been involved in the past that relate to this theme around digital evidence and privacy and personal safety in some of these processes. So what is Starling Lab? It's a joint between USC Shoah Foundation and Stanford Engineering. It's a lab created to use cryptography, use Web3 technologies, decentralized technologies, distributed storage with existing institutions that are doing history preservation, legal accountability work, and investigative journalism. So the way that we work is we often partner with organizations, technology partners, and also people who are specialized in their domain to try and do implementations and prototype out some of these technologies. Ooh, did that load? Okay. And some of my previous work around mesh networks and with decentralized webcam, building local first technologies is also very relevant to this conversation. So I'm going to go into that a bit later. So let's start with Starling Lab. Our framework is centered around capture, store, verify. Capture means at the point of capture, we want to gather as much metadata as possible and generate hashes and cryptographic signatures on that data and register them onto distributed ledgers. So there's a record for permanent authenticity. And then it's not useful if you only have the authenticity information. The files themselves need to be stored somewhere. So we're doing we work with several decentralized storage providers to ensure long-term preservation of evidence files or things that are culturally important. And then the last step, we think about verify. How do we crowdsource or link attestations of information together so that there can be a cloud of evidence and attestations to increase the trust in some of the data that are collected. So let's make this a bit more concrete. Back in this was in June, July, when the war in Ukraine started, we created a dossier of evidence submitted to the International Criminal Court, the ICC. And I want to talk a bit about the technologies that were involved in this, and then we can think about how, if some of the primitives didn't exist as open source code, this would never have been possible. So first is when we think about how people are using social media during the war, there's so much coming out of Ukraine, and is strange that there's no good way of capturing these. Yes, like you can take a screenshot, you can take a link to a Telegram or take a link to an article even. But if the crime is investigated many years afterward, how do you know that? What's the chance that that link will still exist? How do you know? How do you tell between like a screen cap that's manufactured or something that's captured at the time? So we work with Web Recorder to do these high fidelity captures. And we work with the proof mode from the Guardian project. We use Signal to do on the ground investigation to get more evidence around some of these attacks that happened on several schools. So very broadly, you can think about this pipeline. It's all part of the capture workflow, where you have a camera, you take some photos, and then we use proof mode to gather metadata around like GPS information, GPS time, which is a bit more secure than like just the time is set on a camera. And then we package these with cryptographic signatures, GPG signatures in this case, that is transmitted through a secure channel using Signal and a Signal backend. And then right after that, we would register the evidence on blockchains, so we know that this exists. If someone produces an image 10 years from now, we know that that one was not the one that was captured at the time. And then we preserve the data in decentralized clouds. So storage, Filecoin, these sort of decentralized storage systems. So even before we talk about the preservation and registration of that data, in this pipeline, from the camera to getting the thing on Signal, there's a lot of risk to people who are on the ground for this process. There are people building tools to enable to help with the safety of these folks. Signal, VPN, Tor, or even encrypted drives where, hey, what if you have a phone and then someone finds it, like someone catches you, and then you have a phone full of information that may get you into trouble. So I want us to think about some of these technologies that exist and how they're built, and whether if we're sanctioning some of these technologies and the people who are building them, will these technologies still exist? And then, does that mean I have one more minute? Okay. So this brings me to another topic, which is what if they just shut down the whole internet? What actually, some of these workflows won't be possible anymore. But hey, maybe we should start thinking about the internet as like a splinternet and invest in mesh networks and local first applications where you can connect to each other. I know that a lot of apps wouldn't work today. Like Signal, even if you use proxies, Tor, these apps are not expected to work. Someone who is in Iran, if they black out the internet, they won't be talk to like the neighbors. So there are these like networks where each node is able to hold information and route images or route data. And I think we should think more about these sort of technologies. Now, I'm on my last slide. Back to this right to code. How is all this relevant? I want us to think back on all these technologies that are based on cryptography, think back about the crypto wars, and how much of the decisions we make today will change what technologies become possible to build, and like who is this really serving? Yeah, that's it. Thanks.
Benedict, thank you so much. And last but certainly not least, I will pass it over to Alahdiin. The floor is all yours.
Thanks, Michael, and thanks, Leah, again for hosting this and setting this up. Alahdiin is my Arabic name, and I go by that just because I'm into my privacy and I like to control my narrative. And like Michael had mentioned, I work at Mobilecoin, which is a open source privacy preserving protocol, layer 1 blockchain that's integrated with Signal Messenger. And at Mobilecoin, we are trying to fulfill the mission that we think Bitcoin was originally intended to fulfill, which is digital cash, but failed to do so for a number of reasons. We're hyper-focused on payments. We think that the current user experience right now is not really conducive to transact in a meaningful way with blockchain technologies. And that's partly due to the fact that the user experience is very poor. And that also touches on the privacy, but also confirmation times, compatibility. We are, with different devices and applications, our blockchain, or I should say Mobilecoin, is fast, private, secure, minimally impactful on the environment, and compatible with mobile devices and apps like Signal or other messenger apps. I don't want to take up too much. I think most of what I wanted to say was actually expressed by Savannah and Benedict, but definitely things like the OFAC sanctions on Tornado are something we are always, it definitely is something that we pay attention to, because we are in this space that can be considered adjacent, and we want to be able to find a way and engage and educate lawmakers and other folks that are in leadership that these privacy preserving protocols aren't only useful for illicit actors, but there's a very big use case for, I'd say, again, maybe I think the largest use case is for average citizens who in order to actually transact meaningfully, they need to be able to transact or control their data. And yeah, excited to participate in this conversation and see where it goes.
Fantastic. Oh my gosh, thank you all so much for kicking us off so thoroughly here. I'm going to be a mean person, and I'm going to ask the question that a reporter asked me just yesterday and that I get asked all the time in doing this work, which is, who cares about privacy if you have nothing to hide? And who's the brave soul that will start that one off?
I'll answer that one. So I feel like I encounter that question quite a bit, right? When I try to convince people to use something like Signal. And I feel like it's somewhat of a naive statement, right? Because I ultimately, my usual response to that is like, well, can you give me the passwords and access to all your emails and your photos? And obviously no one's ever been like, yes, here you go. And I think the people who don't care about privacy, usually there's like just a lack of awareness or education component that drives them to that narrative or mentality. And there's nothing wrong with valuing privacy. We all have and should have things that we want to keep private. And I think I think something that that specifically usually I encounter that is, again, when I'm trying to like onboard people on something like Signal, and the world that I come from, I spent a good amount of my adult life in the military, and just from like an operational security standpoint, I think there are if you can say that, hey, I have nothing to hide, it's usually coming from a point of privilege, right? There's a lot of the world doesn't live under a regime or in a society where they can trust their government absolutely. I don't know even if anywhere in the world you can do that. And ultimately, I think everyone should care about their privacy, and they do. And I think we're seeing a little bit more of that gaining traction as people adopt more privacy preserving protocols, or new privacy protecting legislation is being enacted. And the downside is though that it can become inconvenient. And then I think that's the dichotomy that we all encounter is the trade-off between, you know, privacy/security and convenience. And usually convenience seems to win. And so something that we're focused on Mobilecoin is trying to make the experience as clean and seamless as possible for our users, so that they don't have to necessarily make that choice. They can have, we believe in a world that you can have privacy and it can be a positive user experience. That's kind of my take on that question.
Benedict or Savannah, do you guys have thoughts on this as well?
I do. I mean, on a cultural level, I do think that we need to try and change the apathy about privacy that a lot of people tend to have. You know, they don't seem to care about their data getting harvested because they don't understand how this is much more sinister. So I know a lot of people have probably seen The Social Dilemma, you know, which talks a little bit or goes into this a little bit more, how you can be influenced with data against you and how it can influence your worldview, how it can polarize you, and how it can really almost get you to think in different ways that you might not have normally thought if you were more informed on certain issues. So I think also something that we talk about a lot amongst our community is that preserving your own privacy now is actually an insurance for your own future. So maybe you don't care about your privacy now because you don't have anything to hide now, but that doesn't mean in the future that things might change. I mean, to use a relevant example, who could have predicted that Roe v. Wade would have been overturned? And now women who want to seek out health services could be at risk, especially in certain states where laws don't protect their privacy and identity. So in some dystopian Handmaid's Tale future, which exists for a lot of people around the world, you know, it could be illegal to have done something in the future. And if you're doing it now and that whole internet history is stored somewhere, you know, you might be arrested for it in the future. It could be used against you in the future. We see this a lot with political campaigns as well in certain countries, excuse me. So if we don't advocate for strong privacy protections now, you may end up actually risking your own safety and security in the future. And we see this a lot with some of our community. So that's all I would say.
Again, at a short note, I think I separate out like the individual level versus like the culturally, do we care about privacy? I think if you tell like, hey, there's like someone whose life is at risk and they're doing some important investigative work and they need privacy technologies, most people will agree that that's really important for them. But most people maybe don't care about their own personal data being out there on Facebook and Instagram. It's kind of like, why do people care about accessibility, right? Like individual may not be so important to you, but then like culturally, is this something that we together care about? Yeah.
I feel like two things on that are Savannah, I completely agree. I think that's a great point, right? Like what is okay or acceptable currently can change very quickly. And I also think, on Benedict, your point, that kind of personal level, like if you don't, again, usually care about privacy until you've experienced some sort of compromise personally, right? It's very, otherwise it's like a very abstract idea, right? If you're not you're not affecting you in your day-to-day life until, you know, your data gets leaked by, you know, like an OMPF hack, or it's like, I think it's the Office of Personnel Management. And
yeah, but there's also like a second way that people may care about this, even if they don't care about it personally. And it's like, it's to your point, earlier point about privilege, that realizing that I'm benefiting from like the other people are taking the risk for me and they need the privacy. And that's why I care about this. Because I'm in a privileged position to benefit off of those risks.
yeah, for sure. And then again, I just would say it comes from a lack of understanding, a lot of it, right? It's like you don't necessarily know what you're giving up in a lot of these different systems. And I think that, combined with the fact that it's also really inconvenient to actually preserve your privacy. So it's like, okay, A, you don't know it. And then if I do even want to try it, it's like I have to go through 10 different steps, and no one else, I can't even like communicate with anyone else. There's only like 10 people on Signal or whatever. Like that's like another common criticism when I try to get people, because to be honest, 95% of my communications in my network occur on Signal. So it's like very normal to me to be able to, like, that's just what I communicate with. And then when I meet someone new and they're not, it's sometimes hard for me to relate and comprehend when they're like, oh, I only know literally like 4 people on this app. It's like, why do I have to have a whole nother app that I have to download? And, you know, it's like not very useful to them. But with all things being equal, the way that I always present it is like, if you have 2 different messaging services or any type of services, and, you know, the user experience is identical, but then one gives you more privacy, I think everyone would choose the one that's more privacy. If, again, the user experience and the number of users are the same, they would choose that if there was no other trade-off.
To get a little bit more technical, we have a question from the audience for Savannah. So, and the question is, in terms of Mysterium nodes, how are people sharing their IP addresses protected if certain activity deemed illegal is traced to them, i.e. their IP address?
Yeah, that's a great question. We get it a lot. So we've designed the node software in a way that you can choose to whitelist traffic. So we have a couple of whitelisting options, which means that if you want to run a node, you're just an everyday kind of web user, you can accept traffic from sources that have been KYC'd. So this is probably the most basic option, but if you do have a sophisticated understanding of how to run a node, similar to Tor nodes, where, you know, people are volunteers and they might want to contribute to the network and keep it strong and anonymous, it holds with the same potential. So if you are looking at websites that are unencrypted, so they don't use HTTPS, then it is possible for someone running one of these exit nodes, if they have the sophisticated understanding of how to do this, to look at your traffic. So we always recommend for people who don't know how to run a node similar to Tor to use this whitelisting option. And you can choose to accept all traffic if that's what you want to do, but we do suggest that people who do that actually have set up the node properly for that kind of use case. I hope that answers that question. If not, you can always reach out to me and also talk to our team. We're nerds about that stuff.
The best kind of nerds, the privacy nerds. Let's see. So I'd like to go around and maybe Savannah, start with you, then do Benedict, and then Alahdiin. Then with this question, can each of you share some real world use cases of these kinds of decentralized privacy tools, and maybe a little bit of speculation just briefly on how they might be affected by sanctions or laws, or what you think the greatest threats to their function are legislatively?
Am I meant to go first? Sorry. Okay. Well, I guess in the case of Tornado Cash, which Alahdiin can speak more to, I'm sure, OFAC has criminalized interaction with this crypto technology. And I think one of the more obvious effects is that these sanctions are extremely off-putting for users who might have sought out privacy tools for really legitimate reasons. And now they'll be discouraged from using these types of privacy tools because there's a risk their money could be censored. And it just dilutes trust in crypto technology even further. But an alternative and interesting use case with US sanctions that actually affects our network is the case of Iran, where US sanctions have cut off the Iranian population from the US economy. So, you know, they can't access banking, businesses, or any online platforms. And Iranian citizens are actually turning to cryptocurrency to access these foreign services anonymously, and it gives them a way to join the global economy. So for example, with our users in Iran who want to use our VPN service and can't use traditional payment methods like PayPal, because they're locked out of those systems, they're turning to cryptocurrency, which, as we know, can't be blocked. And they use that to pay nodes in the network and access the internet that way. So we also see this happening, in Russia, which is heavily sanctioned, because users there do want to access real news. They want to see things that aren't propaganda. They want to know what's happening in Ukraine. And they have very limited options to them to access and participate in the global World Wide Web. And, with a quarter of the world's internet users being arrested or can potentially be arrested for sharing something on Facebook, these tools are really important. Tornado, VPNs, Signal, they're all tools that can aid civil and human rights movements and their coordination. So if it helps in any way, we do want this tool to be used by, the incredibly brave feminist movement in Iran right now. And we have to find ways to make them easily accessible, in spite of sanctions, in spite of self-interested governments. And it is our job as creators of these tools to innovate and find ways to reach those communities, I think.
Yeah, I think some of the downstream implications of the sanctioning is like very dangerous. One is towards contributors of software. So where do we draw this line, right? Like we can say the same thing about Tor, about Signal even. Now, of course, like illegal activities take place in the crypto channels on the internet. So does that, what's the chilling effect on people who want to contribute to these open source technologies that we rely on for like very legitimate reasons? It's really dangerous because like you're contributing today and you don't know that if this may become misused or somehow sanctioned in the future. The other group of people is like nodes that operate infrastructure in these decentralized networks. Traditionally, things are operated by like one corporation or like one person, and it's easy to say like we sanction that. But now these things are decentralized in nature. You may have a blockchain that has like 1,000 validators. What is the risk to the validators that they're basically doing back office book checking on in a very generalized sense of honest code execution? I think there needs to be a lot more clarity on this.
With regard to how these tools are used, from our perspective, I was actually just speaking with some folks from the UN yesterday, and a lot of times they rely on donations, but it's very important sometimes for them, for in a lot of the areas that they operate, for them to protect the identities and the information of the beneficiaries, because a lot of time their beneficiaries live in areas or under regimes that are authoritarian. And an example I think a lot of us are probably familiar with, there was an initiative a while ago where people were trying to support girls and women in Afghanistan that were trying to learn how to code, and the Taliban didn't always look at that favorably. And in order to be able to support these people, you need mechanisms and infrastructure that allows people to send value or currency in a way that still doesn't compromise those individuals receiving them. And that currency, though, needs to also be usable, right? And so they're just sanctioned under an umbrella, then at that point, those individuals in this case might potentially be, I'm not saying this didn't happen, but let's say these girls in Afghanistan, if they fell under that sanction, they would no longer be able to even use this technology, and it would just be completely worthless. And at the same time, I do think we need to figure out a way, like we don't want lots of money going to the nuclear weapons program for North Korea, right? Like that's also not an acceptable outcome. And I think that's why we're having some of these discussions. Like, is there a way to figure out, what can we do? Can we add friction points, or can we do something where it makes it less desirable or less easy for, regimes or despotic governments to capitalize on this. And I think something that is also very important to note, and that we discussed in a previous conversation, is that the DPRK, you know, they didn't get the value, like $500 million from something like Tornado Cash, right? They got that money or that currency or that crypto from poorly designed systems that had poor security considerations, like Axie Infinity, right? Like that's where the money actually came from. And Tornado was definitely used as a tool for them to launder that money. But we, as an industry, as a whole, I think need to do a better job of policing ourselves and kind of creating higher standards so that it's not easy for these kind of illicit actors to target. Because right now, yeah, I mean, it makes total sense, right? It's like you're going to go for the low-hanging fruit, and a lot of the projects in the crypto space, and I think this is a big criticism from people outside the crypto ecosystem or the Web3 ecosystem, right? It just looks like it's a bunch of scams, and it just looks like just a horrible look. And like we have to, again, take it upon ourselves to clean this up, I think.
I'd like to pick up on a point that Alahdiin just made and ask this question to each of you. So Alahdiin, you're saying that, you know, we need to introduce friction points into the system, you know, that there is a problem here we need to address. Looking at what happened to Tornado Cash, what kind of regulation do you think is appropriate? Is any kind of regulation appropriate? How would you respond to someone in the US government or the EU or elsewhere who says, we need to regulate Tornado Cash or other similar systems, you know, because of this use case? You know, regulation doesn't have to necessarily be a complete ban. I think we can all assume there are gradations. So would you have any recommendations to legislators who are looking at how to craft effective regulation? So why don't we go in backwards order? We'll go Alahdiin, Benedict, and then Savannah.
I think this becomes like a very, again, narrow tightrope, right? And I'm definitely speaking on behalf of myself, but I think they should be considered, but I don't know if you can regulate a protocol. I don't know if we should consider regulating things at the protocol level. I think at maybe the wallet application level, you know, that might be easier and make more sense. But I think at the protocol level, you start falling down a very slippery slope when you're saying the protocols need to be regulated. And then how do you define? I think you need to ask, like, how do you define that regulation? When I meant at introducing friction points, that's just like a potential consideration when you're, you know, designing some of these systems from the get-go. But I don't even know if I feel conflicted even on that, right? Of like, I don't have a great answer. Like if I was talking, I would want to talk to them and ask what does regulation, how do they define regulation? Because I'm just weary that can lead to, there's no way to go back to Savannah's point. There's no way to really make sure that regimes don't change. And at that point, if you have that ability, then you can regulate it into a way that maybe it was unintended in the get-go. So I'm a little bit hesitant to say yes, we should just be regulating things at the protocol level.
I feel we have to have better idea of the pros and cons of having protocols existing, because we can say the internet enabled a lot of crimes. It enabled a whole new class of crimes. What is the benefits of the internet? How are we investigating? How did like investigation of crime change since the internet? And I think we can also look at, like, the new thing here is like decentralization, and no one is in charge of running the protocol. But speech and code is not new. There are also previous learnings. So the people who have been building decentralized social networks, a lot of, obviously all the people who are trying to do illegal stuff gravitates towards those platforms. Did they all become unmanageable, or are there like ways to manage that? Yeah, I don't have a straightforward answer to this, but I think the broad sanctioning of like a piece of code would set a very bad precedent for and it feels a little uninformed, that there isn't enough thinking behind this decision. Yeah, around the pros and cons specifically, what the downstream implications will be, and like really knowing all the benefits that come out of technologies like mixers and not just for financial transactions, but privacy preserving data exchanges. Yeah.
I also don't have a straight answer for this, but I do think it raises a really important point, which is about the right to code and what responsibilities come with that right to code. So I don't think that sanctioning something that is open source and permissionless is necessarily a productive solution, because it's neutral code. It's a tool. We can't really influence how code is used. Otherwise, if you regulate code, then you're just opening yourself up to a number of friction points for innovation and in general protections for users. But I do think there has to be deeper collaboration and open dialogue between lawmakers and projects making these tools to try and find ways to minimize harms together. So as builders, we do need to be accountable and intentional with the technology we're building, so that the negative effects of our technology always are outweighed by the benefits, like drastically. So developers and designers, I think, can be asking themselves, what is the transition going to look like from our current systems to a new one? And this might mean working with lawyers or having an in-house legal team to help inform design, you know, to see if there are ways to work with AML laws, anti-money laundering, because that does matter. We don't want to help fund North Korea's nuclear weapon programs. So we can ask if there are counter solutions to these problems. We can see how we can improve the code. We can design these tools and collaborate with human rights and privacy advocates and organizations who know a lot about policy and the real needs and challenges of the users we're building for. So I do think the technology is constantly improving and changing. So rather than regulating, hopefully we'll be able to balance it out with things like zero knowledge proofs, self-sovereign identity. We just need to keep innovating in a constructive way that can also be compliant. That's my opinion.
Benedict?
Yeah, I feel there's like similarity with internet carriers. Like if you're a common carrier, you're carrying traffic for everybody. And so this may be like a matter of classification, that a smart contract is really, it's like a common carrier, and its liability is limited to like a set of things. Like, of course, someone could be sending illegal content, rights violations through your ISP. What is the way to deal with that? You don't sanction the entire ISP and the fiber. So.
Great. And then Benedict, I'm sorry, I'm going to bounce another one at you. You spoke to decentralization being like the new thing in here that we're grappling with. And I just was curious, and if anybody else wants to speak to this for their own projects as well, why do your projects, Benedict, use decentralized storage systems for evidence? What is the benefit there?
Yeah, I think centralization I see as a risk for some use cases. censorship risk, and also monopolization of data. So I think we complain a lot about these giant tech corporations. What is the way of decentralizing the control? So then they're no longer like in this like very entrenched position, right? And well, I shouldn't use the decentralization as the as that, but one way to lower barrier of entries is for the platforms to be decentralized. I think we're not arguing that we need services that Google provides. That's not the problem. Is who owns that infrastructure, who owns that platform, and decentralization allows us to have more participants in the tools that we depend on. Yeah, and specifically for digital evidence, I think being able to preserve things, these are just like things that we need to accept as facts, and it's not one corporation. It's not a Twitter blue check mark. It's something more. It's something broader because we are living in this globalized information system. So yeah, I'll pass it to someone else too.
Alahdiin.
So sorry, I actually wanted to take it back to that previous question. I want to just requalify something as far as your initial question, Mike. I think I was trying to be a little maybe too political with my answer, but I do think to your question of should they be regulated, I think regulation is necessary. However, I think the way in which regulation comes about is more important. And that's what kind of, I think, what Savannah was saying, right? Like how like regulation through enforcement is a very different mechanism than having the collaborative discussions from the get-go and getting some level of consensus during the design process. So that's just something I wanted to throw in from that point that I think is important.
I have a quick question that actually picks up on something that, or actually, Savannah, would you like to jump in on this, or should I move on to a new question?
Feel free to move forward.
It's something that I'm really personally curious about. And this was something that Alahdiin mentioned in his presentation. What do you think is actually needed to improve user experience? What are the critical steps that you think that projects need to keep in mind, and what should projects do to make all of these tools more accessible to people who do not come from a crypto background or do not necessarily have a lot of tech expertise? And why don't we do Alahdiin, then Savannah, and then Benedict?
Sure. From my perspective, I think the users at the end of the day they shouldn't even know that they're using a cryptocurrency or Web3 tool. It's just like an implementation detail, but the experience has to almost be identical with what they're used to or what their current expectations are. And so if there's any more friction in that experience, I think it's, you start dramatically reducing the likelihood of adoption. And that is something I think, that is kind of one of our North Star of like, hey, everyone, this is what the standard when right now you can go to a store and tap your credit card via NFC, and in 3 seconds it's done. And if you can't mimic some level of an experience of that through payments, then it's going to be a hard sell to, even if you do have the privacy. And that I think is why we see, obviously I'm very familiar with using Signal. I've used it for a long time, but that's something that they have done very well at Signal, right? Like their experience is, you could say, equal to any other messenger platform. And then you have this added layer, but it wasn't always the case, right? But as they've improved that, and as it's kind of come on par with the other messenger apps, it's a lot easier for people to adopt. And I think we see that now with like the curve in adoption kind of increasing seemingly exponentially.
I think Alahdiin kind of wraps it all up pretty well. I remember the days when Mysterium could only be accessed with command code line, and it was pretty difficult for the average internet user to even understand what this tool does. And now, we have 11,000 nodes in the network, back from when I remember we were trying to convince 5 people to register. And so for us, abstracting the complexity down to a point where now you just have a simple interface and dashboard has been a long process, because obviously interfaces, like Alahdiin said, they don't really change. We can't really recreate the wheel because users just won't want to use those tools. But what we can do is try and make it as accessible on the protocol level, but also just on an educational level. Even the language that we use to try and onboard people into the node network is incredibly simple. We try and make it sound like what they're doing is just clicking a few buttons, when in reality it's so much more complicated than that. So I think also communication is a really big friction point in this space. People think it's overly complicated, so it's our job as innovators to try and make things appear a lot easier than they are, so we can onboard them.
I feel a lot of it is just the maturity of this technology, and I actually think privacy preserving technologies will give a better user experience than what currently exists. Think about like how many privacy tools you use. Even when they're implemented, you're like fighting with operating systems, you're fighting with browsers, and tools are the way they are because of a lack of collaboration between these like people who are building different parts of the stack. Like imagine if it is unreasonable to like ask everyone to buy like a hardware cryptocurrency wallet in order to have a wallet. But hey, this hardware can be integrated into your laptop, onto your phone, and it automatically, just like when you make a transaction, is already through the app, is secure. So I think my one thing that I hope for is more collaboration between different types of private companies, protocol makers, open source technologists, and designers like across the board. Yeah.
My threshold for UX, if it's a good UX, is if my dad, who's like 10 days older than dirt, if he can use it, and then my niece, who's like 4, can use it, then that's kind of the standard. I feel like both of those have to, like Savannah was saying, most people don't have technical knowledge, and most people don't want to go on YouTube and have to watch a tutorial on how to use your application. And if you have to do that, it's a failure.
Okay, in our last few minutes, this might be an interesting question, but we talk a lot when it comes to laws and sanctions and actions that are taken against privacy preserving technologies, tools, and their creators, about the phrase chilling effect. And I often feel, when even using those words, that they're a bit abstract. And so I'm wondering if each of you would take a moment to just let us know what a day in which sanctions are issued against code looked like for you or for your community. What does being subject to this chilling effect and this chilling action actually look or feel like in your world?
I can start. I feel like people are still gonna code, they'll just share less, they'll just collaborate less. And the tools that exist, people will still misuse them. They'll just take the same technologies, deploy it somewhere else, and use it for whatever intention they have. Like it doesn't, doesn't solve, it doesn't erase the problem.
Yeah, I echo what Benedict says, but I also think there's from like an emotional or psychological level, it kind of is probably going to be individual based, and depending on what your situation is, I think it can be quite concerning if when you see that from the echo the chilling effect. It's like, oh, there's this uncertainty, right? When you don't know if, I mean, the consequences are not trivial, right? Being sanctioned by OFAC. And there, again, it's very unclear. And so there, I think, is for some folks, it leads to hesitation or reservation if they want to continue pursuing these things. It almost feels like, well, is it worth it, right? Especially, depending on what the personal situation is. If you have a family to feed and they're dependent on this and on your work, and all of a sudden now you're compromising potentially them or the people who work under you, right? If you lead an organization, you're responsible for these people. And I think a lot of leaders and CEOs have kind of re-examined what that means, right? And they have to take that into account where they're leading their organization. And I think that's where it becomes chilling for some folks, right? Where they become conflicted out of principle. They feel like they're doing like the right thing, like a noble cause they're pursuing, and yet they potentially could send themselves and their family or their employees into harm's way.
We are just at the hour. I just wanted to say a tremendous,
Anna, did you get a chance to answer?
No, it's
I'm
okay.
so sorry.
No, if you want to
Savannah,
wrap it
please
up.
accept my apologies.
No, if you want to wrap it up, it's totally fine.
No. We can definitely go by it for another minute or so. So please.
All right, I'll be quick. I'll be quite brief. I've seen a lot of outrage and confusion in the community. And I think it kind of comes down to the fact that nobody still understands why Alex Petsov was arrested, because he's not been charged. So I think everyone's concern is that not only will developers be put off from publishing and sharing open source code, which is not only their First Amendment right in the US, but it actually drives innovation in this space and makes code stronger and far more secure. So I think if we had more clarity as builders in this space of why he was arrested, what the actual issues are, and like what laws he violated, then it would also help us to inform our design and our strategies as business leaders in this space. Because it makes no sense for developers to be arrested for something that they did not intentionally do. So on the chilling effect on that side, I think it's also this lack of information that is making it harder to process for everyone. And that's what I'll leave with.
Thank you so much. And again, my apologies. And a tremendous thank you to our panelists for what was one of the most, I think, interesting conversations that certainly we've had on this series and that I've heard in this space. The recording will be posted on a new website that Fight for the Future has just created, which I'll put in the link for everyone. It's web3foractivists.com. And again, we will have another one next month. And thank you all so very much.